Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There it is, so you don't miss any of our football content this season. It has been, if I might say, fantastic. Our Week 5 reaction is presented by Uber Eats. Get almost anything for game day. All right. Crazy weekend. We're going to spend 90% of it on NFL. John Middlekauff, as we do every Sunday, former NFL scout with the Philadelphia Eagles, 3 and Out's his podcast. He joins me every Sunday night. So I want to just start with the first game of the day, the Jets. So the Minnesota Vikings beat the Jets, was it 23-17? And Jets got off to a really bad start, as they've been prone to do this year. Even though those are supposed to be the scripted plays and where you get off to pretty decent starts offensively, they didn't. And I've got reams and reams of notes here. Sam Darnold had a bad pick. There were opportunities. But so already New York media wants to fire Robert Saleh. So let me just defend him. And I don't think he's a great coach. He hasn't proven to be. One, because the general manager whiffed on Zach Wilson and a left tackle, they had to basically desperately give the franchise to the best free agent quarterback they could find, which was Aaron Rodgers. So Aaron had the power to bring in Nat Hackett. I don't think Robert Saleh wanted to. So his GM put him in a situation where he's dealing with a relationship with an OC he wouldn't have hired. I mean, Nat Hackett's, reputation is what it is. We know he's got an impulsive owner. Now, Alan Lazard's had multiple drops today. That's on Aaron. But Hassan Reddick, this defense is good. Somebody finally shut down Minnesota. How good would they be with Hassan Reddick? So I look at Saul and I think, you can blame him, but John, I do this all the time. Are you, as a coach, Matt Eberflus, are you good with your side of the ball? We finally found a defense that slowed down Minnesota today. My take is Saleh is having to overcome GM mistakes, an impulsive owner, and Aaron's age, which he's just not what he used to be. You're kind of smirking. Would you run him out of town, Saleh?
Well, I laugh because only Colin Cowherd and Aaron Rodgers could get me out of bed 6:30 a.m. to watch one of these London games, and I did it, and I did it for you, and I did it for Aaron. And 10 minutes into the game, you're just thinking they're going to get boat raced. I mean, it was just 3 and out, 3 and out. That game against the Patriots, it was hard to deny he had a youthful feel. It turns out the Patriots are awful. And these last 2 weeks, you saw him against Denver, who turns out Denver playoff team, defense. I mean, they're pretty impressive. And then obviously Minnesota, really, really good on defense. He looked really old.
Yeah.
He looked really old. And he couldn't move around. He's definitely, whatever's going on with his lower leg. He talked about it coming into the game. He got rolled up, but the magic is gone. I mean, those back shoulder throws, the throw that ended the game, there were the pick six, little fluky. That happens sometimes when you just kind of throw it in the guy. But the other 2 picks, the way the game ends, when has he ever been so off with the wide receiver on that throw? That was really bad. But his other pick, which is a layered throw, which I would say Aaron Rodgers is as good as anyone in the history of the sport, down the seam between 2 defenders, and it looked like a remedial quarterback, what they do. Airmail. I mean, the receiver has no shot. And you're just going, I just don't see it. And the other thing is, how did they get his swag back? And this was when he was younger, pre-Achilles in Green Bay. They started running the ball well.
They have no run game.
You're watching
in
the last 2 games. I mean, I don't think they've accounted for like 70 total yards. And they don't even try. I mean, you're just, at this point in time, 40 years old, the way he was playing today, to ask him to throw it 45-ish times is not a winning formula. And let's face it, Colin, these quarterbacks, and his resume was way better than Russell Wilson and obviously Deshaun Watson, but great quarterbacks never become available. That never happens. The reason Peyton Manning became available, they thought his neck was broken.
Yeah.
Right? Bill Belichick said, listen, you guys all think I'm crazy. I'm shorting a 42-year-old player. It's very rare that Josh Allen in his prime or Lamar changes teams. That's not what happens. So we now have a long list of Russell disaster. Obviously, Deshaun has a chance to be a historic disaster. And this Aaron Rodgers thing, last year, old guy got hurt. Freaky, okay. And this year, you're just seeing them play decent competition, and they just feel overwhelmed. I mean, they really do. But he's not good enough. He's not good enough to mask their issues, like you said, with their offensive coordinator and their personnel.
Yeah, they asked him to throw 54 times, and he's not that player. And the other thing is, I had said this. I always thought Cam Newton wasn't very disciplined mechanically, but I thought he got away with it in his prime. Cam was just an arm thrower. He wouldn't set. Aaron has been able to get away with sometimes floating, flipping, kind of
sometimes I would say the majority of the time.
Right. In his prime, he could get away with it. And he just can't anymore.
No.
His mechanics, Cam Newton's mechanics, they're just, that's why that is literally why Brady was good to the end. He was mechanically perfect.
Peyton too, before his arm fell off.
Yep. And Aaron and Cam Newton jump out to me as players that were just sort of so gifted they got away with it. I mean, go back to Aaron's last year in Green Bay. They were 8-9. Aaron, again, in a organization that was young but stable, they lost at home to Detroit, which was 1 year away from being good. Yeah. And now you look at them. Think about this. Denver, with a worse roster and a rookie quarterback, has a better record and has beaten the Jets head-to-head with Bo Nix, who, by the way, I watched today. Again, they're not asking him to do a ton, but athletically, Bo Nix is moving. Bo Nix is picking up. He's moving the chains. That's an average roster that Vegas had at 5.5 wins. So Denver's beaten them in New York, has a better record, won again today, and is actually starting to figure it out offensively. So I think your point is true, is that when you talk about, I think Matt Stafford has kind of, like Aaron, he doesn't move as well, but I think his mechanics are better and he's got a better head coach. But most of these guys not named Brady, John, they age really fast. And Aaron got hit today. He was in pain the last quarter and a half of that football game.
Yeah, it feels this could end pretty ugly. The rest of this year. Obviously, they'll still win some games. They got players. I don't view them as like a 4 or 5 win team, but it could be a bumpy 7 to 8 win ride. And the way he looks relative to what he's been, you talked about this a lot leading into the season, where he would rank in the AFC, the overall landscape of the quarterbacks. And, a lot of people freak out when you say, hey, 7th, 8th, 9th guy, give or take, somewhere in that region. The last 2 weeks, he hasn't sniffed being a top 20 quarterback. Obviously, last week, he even admitted he was atrocious. And today, you just see his physical limitations. He's not able to move like he once did. Beside Garrett Wilson, they're so Lazard dependent. And when they're not running the ball, he can't just go. It was really glaring today because, again, we had a football game start for us at 6:30 in the morning. So right when the 10 a.m. game starts, and you just go from that, because that basically ran right up till 10.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden it's Lamar and Joe Burrow. And you go, for a long period of time, these guys have been good for a while now too, but a couple years ago, Aaron was ahead of them, winning MVPs or right there with them, the superstars of the league. And then you're watching those two guys and you just witnessed Aaron. You're like, he feels like, I didn't watch this, but Willie Mays on the Mets or something. Now, his version of it. And it's just, I don't think that you can circumvent his age if you can't run the ball, because his game was very predicated on him moving around. And there's a couple times I think he knows, like, I can't get away like I used to. And he kind of just plops. And it was he just looks old. He looks weathered, Colin. He looks weathered.
What I think really helps Robert Saleh and saves his job for the time being is they don't have a strong offensive coordinator. If they did, I think Woody Johnson, if they lost to Buffalo, would make a move. I really do. He's that impulsive. But they don't have a great coordinator.
Is that who they play this upcoming week, Buffalo?
I think it's Buffalo's on the schedule. So their schedule gets really tough. The other thing is that, and I mean, they targeted Garrett Wilson 22 times today. They're like the Cowboys. If CeeDee Lamb or Garrett Wilson twisted an ankle, they don't have an offense.
No.
They're totally dependent. That's why the Devontae Adams rumors make sense. But, when you start looking at the Jets, and I said this week, Yankees, Mets in the playoffs, Knicks season starting. This is the first viable championship team. So much of this franchise historically has been about relevance. And it's like I always call them the low self-esteem sports franchises. Cleveland gets desperate. Deshaun Watson's contract. We've seen NBA franchises like this. The Jets, Mets historically, the Yankees had a big signing. We have to have one. This organization now, you start looking at it, I think they have to draft a quarterback in the AFC. Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, Burrow, C.J. Stroud, Justin Herbert. It was, okay, let's get Aaron some help next year. They have to draft a quarterback. There's no question they have to draft a quarterback.
Well, I understand the GM and the coach have to be realizing the light at the end of the tunnel. If they win 7-8 games, they're all going to get fired. But
yeah.
You cannot trade a high pick for Davante Adams. I think that's malpractice in the long-term landscape of this operation. Because even if you add Davante Adams, okay, you're still probably a one-and-done playoff team at best, maybe winning a game. If this is the version of the quarterback, right? He is not a top 10 quarterback. So, I don't know if you saw the report today that Mark Davis, most of these teams, it's like, listen, I hire my GM, you do what's best for the organization. Mark Davis, like, we will not take anything less than a second round pick, which I understand where he's coming from, but that kind of shows you the dysfunction of the Raiders. He's the one making the call on the compensation, but maybe the Jets just kind of give in. Well, they're not going to be a top 5 drafting team, right? They're still going to win games. So you're not drafting high enough to probably get the premium guy, which is already a pretty questionable quarterback draft. So you're more likely to be where they just were, 12 to 15. So giving up that second round pick or 2 third-round picks or whatever, that's valuable, capital to move up. So now that's the problem though. So internally, these guys are fighting for their lives because they can just see getting fired coming right down, the railroad tracks at them. So maybe they're like, screw it, take the pick, Mark. And if I'm the Raiders and I could get the Jets pick, that seems pretty crazy to me. And I also think if you're Davante Adams, you go with Aaron, it's like, is he going to retire after this year? It feels, this is the problem about how much limited equity the franchise had together, that once you go through a little adversity, like the Niners right now are in shambles. But at the end of the day, Fred, George Kittle, Trent Williams, all these guys have played together for so long. And the Patriots or the Chiefs, when they go through bumpy roads, like sometimes it's like, hey, guys, we've been doing this for a while. Everyone with the Jets, like, I just got here. You just got here. We've played 4 games with Aaron total, right? It's just, it feels like a ticking time bomb because of this situation hanging over the head with the executive and the coach. And then Aaron's age. And he's just kind of, I don't want to say he's pouty, but he's just, his body language is not great right now.
Yeah. So Viking fans, I know you're upset with us because we're talking about the New York Jets, but they're in crisis. The Vikings now are undefeated. They had a pretty bumpy second half. Sam Darnold did have one of his kind of classic reckless interceptions, but I will say this, he mostly managed the game. Even good. Kansas City's had multiple bad halves, and Mahomes has had multiple horrible picks. Today, Stafford had another one. Aaron had several. So Darnold is allowed to have some, he throws the ball down the field. Sam has receivers that can make plays. I thought overall Minnesota really controlled the game in the first half, got into Aaron's head, and then it was just holding on. I kind of feel like that way with the New York Giants, even though we thought the game was in doubt. I feel like it was the Giants' day. Their O-line was just controlling Seattle's injury-plagued D-line. So Minnesota's undefeated. I don't take anything negative. You're not going to run through this league. Good God, Bama got beat by Vandy. You're not going to run through this league and not have really bad halves. So I don't have any take on Minnesota. They won.
That's an impressive win. So, to me, you're not going to beat everyone going up 28-0 in the first quarter. That wasn't a sustainable model. So to me, to win a game like this, where you did have the lead the whole time, but they were kind of coming back and your defense holds serve. And like you said, Sam, like he didn't crumble. Today would have been a moment in previous years where maybe he fumbles and throws 2 other picks, and it's just, the Jets win because they get handed a victory by Sam Darnold. And that did not happen today.
It's time for this week's player I thought might give almost anything to redo his game, brought to you by Uber Eats. This week it was Aaron Rodgers, 3 picks, including 2 in the first quarter. First time Rodgers ever had 2 picks in the opening quarter of a game. That was this week's Uber Eats Player of the Week. Get almost anything for game day delivered with Uber Eats, the official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. All right, let's go to San Francisco, Arizona. That was one of my blazing 5 picks. I like the 7.5. Arizona, I think, should have won by more, but they had that field goal blocked, and San Francisco took it in. Arizona beats the Niners 24-23. San Francisco, once again, without Christian McCaffrey. Kyle Shanahan has losing record. Now, Mason Jordan's a good running back, but McCaffrey gives you so much more than that. So I had said, one of the things I believe, I think Washington's for real. And when they housed Arizona, people sold. But Jesus, Arizona, Kyler Murray, Harrison and Wilson, McBride, the tight end. Connor's a freaking beast at running back.
He's been a good player for a long time.
He's a good player. This offense, I don't know if they're a playoff team. I don't know if they're brilliantly coached, but they're going to beat teams. They just have too many players. Kyler Murray, after the interception of Bosa, standing still and freezing, would drive me insane if I was a head coach. But it's a huge win for them. Let's talk San Francisco. I thought their offense, I mean, if you looked at the box score, I did right before I came on. I mean, it was even. If you didn't watch the game, you'd say, oh, it's a great game, 24-23. But it did feel like it was a game in which San Francisco had in the bag and let slip away.
Yeah, they were 1-6 in the red zone. I mean, they're just not scoring enough points. And I don't know if you can put it all on Christian McCaffrey. Obviously, he's a loss.
It's a part of it.
You got Brandon Ayuk, you got George Kittle, you got Deebo Samuel, you got Juwan Jennings, you got Mason. Like, to me, there are no excuses to not. You're up 23-10 at half. And I understand you lose your kicker early in the game, but I don't give a shit. You're not playing. This is not the 07 Patriots here. Like you said, Tyler's always given the Niners fits. You know, he basically opened the game up with a 50-yard run. They do a lot of that zone read stuff. It throws the Niners D linemen off because they are so quick to get upfield. Then all of a sudden a crease. The Niners defense has not been the same.
It's not.
Today was a total team loss, offense and defense. Purdy's, I thought, was pretty hit or miss. Even the final pick, which is not all his fault, he's hit. But Tom Brady's like, George Kittle's wide open. We don't have time to be patting the ball. You got to get rid of it. I don't care what you have to make these quick decisions. And that's what they lean on him to do, to be really smart. And I thought, it's like, you're holding the ball for a guy that's covered down the field when you got 85 wide open. But defensively, Greenlaw got hurt in that Super Bowl, and they are just not the same as a run defense. You can run on them. The physicality, they still hit hard, but usually it's guys 6-7 yards down the field.
Right.
And if Bosa and the D-line doesn't sack the quarterback basically once a drive, which is hard for them when they're playing a guy like Kyler Murray who can scramble around, they just look like, I don't want to say a shell of themselves, but they are a watered-down version of the defense we've seen for the last 3 years. And that's with Fred Warner playing at a really high level. But I think you feel Greenlaw's miss. And let's face it, just over time, like this dynasty, not a dynasty, excuse me, that's Chiefs. This run of the Shanahan era is like, there's a lot of film on these guys now, you know, so it gets more difficult. People know what Purdy likes to do, what Kyle likes to do. And defensively, they've had a lot. It's not like they have a Spags, right, or a Flores. I mean, they just elevated this guy who's been a lifetime position coach that I'm safe to say no one else was ringing down the doorbell to hire the guy.
Well, I mean, look at Seattle's Legion of Boom defense. You get about a 3-year run on new stuff. And then, you know, it's the Legion of Boom. All of a sudden, somebody's a free agent. They leave. You can't afford them. All of a sudden, the league's got 2 and 3 years of tape. You know, Miami's offense. Remember, for about 7 games, 8 games, nobody could, all that motion. Then it's not college football where, you know, sometimes a coach can't over the course of a game, the coordinators can't solve the riddle. NFL teams solve the riddle at half. It's just better coaching. So I think it's a great point by you. And I also think, you know, there are certain guys I can't quit. I'll get to Lamar later. I think he's just a remarkable player. Kyler Murray, you have to make decisions in this league. You would hope you never have to make it with a quarterback. Maturity, commitment. But John, you look around this league, there are not a lot of Kyler Murrays. Let's say he is, and I think he throws a better ball than Lamar, but I think he's about 80% of Lamar Jackson in terms of elusiveness, movement, playmaking. He brings the same headache to a D coordinator. You're never quite sure. I mean, you can't cheat. That's why Connor, you can't cheat on him. And that's, I've said this about it, is people hung around with Jay Cutler, who didn't have Kyler Murray's ability for a long time because of the arm strength. Where are you on Kyler Murray? I mean, they're stuck with a contract. I mean, him not moving on the Bosa pick, just staring at it, is like bad. Like, that's really bad in the film room.
I think one fatal flaw, and I would say the biggest difference between Lamar and Kyler is Kyler cannot see sitting in the pocket. Yeah. And Lamar can. And he did it today. He can pick you apart in the pocket when he's on. Yeah. And Kyler, one of his biggest throws today on a 4th down to Marvin Harrison, he can do the Lamar, Michael Jackson backpedal, right, and get away from pressure because he's such an elite athlete. He's got such a great arm, but you have to get him on the move. To me, he's a little bit of a tease. Like, he is he's an excellent talent. Do I think you can build a sustainable winning team with him? I'm not sure you can. I think he's a tough guy to win with over the course of a season, but on an individual game basis, like you said, no defensive coordinator feels great getting on the bus headed to the stadium.
Nope. I think that's the best way when I watch him. First of all, he's going to get dinged up over the course of a season. He runs a lot and he's small. And the second thing is he's sort of a moody player. There's times when he's really engaged, and there's times when he feels a little like Aaron Rodgers. After Aaron had that second pick, he was kind of too casual with some of his deliveries, like he was pissed off and he was telling Hackett to go, and he's eye rolling Lazard. And Allen, it's not that Aaron's not playing hard, but you can see his emotions. You know, Brady would pump his fist after a touchdown, or he'd yell briefly on the sidelines, but he was fairly robotic emotionally in a game. Aaron and Kyler Murray, I can tell. I could just tune the game in and go, they're leading, they're trailing, they just threw a pick. And I think Kyler's hard to coach, even though I think he's brilliant. I think he keeps everybody on eggshells. I've been told this by a former teammate, an executive, and a coach, that Cliff Kingsbury, there were times he wanted to go to Colt McCoy. Like, it drove him nuts.
I think it's weird, right? I respect his God-given abilities, which he's got to be on the short list of some of the greatest athletes that have ever played the sport. I mean, you're talking like Bo Jackson, Deion Sanders, especially when you factor in the guy was a top 10 draft pick in baseball, but also his main downfall as a player, beside the intangible stuff, that height is something pretty hard to overcome.
Yeah.
And in a game when I can corral you, or you're just not running it at will, which he was today, I don't trust him to be able to do what Lamar consistently does. Because I think there's a big difference in whatever Lamar is, 6'3". I mean, that's, almost a 5-inch gap between if you told me Kyler Murray was Lamar's height, I still think that what Lamar's intangibles are pretty special.
And Lamar is also, there is no question, he is completely committed to his sport.
No one's ever exactly. So the intangible stuff, which is a make or break thing, would still drive people nuts with Kyler. But I do think you could make the argument you could build a sustainable winner with him, because he can throw. Like, it's not because of lack of arm strength. I just legitimately think he can't see. How could you? I mean, it's just basic math, right? The guy standing in front of him is 6'5", he's 5'9". That's why he runs around. And he's a fun player to watch, though.
All right, let's segue to Houston beats Buffalo 23-20. And I want to talk specifically the Bills' second straight loss, about some game management. So for those who didn't watch, the game was tied 20-20. There was 40 seconds left. The Bills were deep in their own territory at the 3-yard line. Houston had all their timeouts. So what you'd want to do is run the ball in the line, run it into the line, force the Texans to use all their timeouts, punt it away, and they'd have, 16 seconds.
Yeah.
Instead, the Bills threw the ball 3 times, giving Houston just enough time to get it and kick a field goal and win. So this stuff was, and I don't like to crush coaches, John, on game management. Andy Reid took heat for years. I don't know your injuries. I don't know your game plan. But there are things I think that it's fair to criticize coaching. I think listen, the Cowboys, 17 seconds, they're running a quarterback draw. It's like, that's not the play. Yeah. Especially when you watch Kirk Cousins in Atlanta meticulously line up this past Thursday to win. Like, that's how a veteran team does it, and a veteran quarterback. But I watched that game management by the Bills as they lose to the Texans. And there's no, it's Buffalo's fine. This is a good organization. They're going to win this division. New England's awful. The Jets aren't very good. And Miami's quarterback play is suboptimal. But I was sitting there thinking, and I like McDermott, but I'm sitting there thinking that one's on McDermott, and Josh Allen won't say it. But do you believe against a John Harbaugh, a Jim Harbaugh, a D'Amico Ryans, an Andy Reid, in maybe a year, a Sean Payton, do you trust Sean McDermott?
Well, I picked this team to, compete for the Super Bowl. I liked them more than most people that thought they were going to take a step back. And that was pretty embarrassing because CJ Stroud had a pick and a fumble in the fourth quarter. Like they were trying to give you the game. And in that situation, at this point in time, how can you? Like, I can't trust the Bills. And I've been one of Josh Allen's biggest fans, but it's hard to say he's, based on today, you couldn't say he's better than Lamar. That's for, I mean, it was one of the worst games I've ever seen him play. He was atrocious today. So part of it to me, and this is always the pushback from the anti-analytical number people of like, are we sure in this situation? Like, I get the overall picture, but it's like you're pinned. Your quarterback, I think at the time was like 9 for 27, which again, I don't remember him playing such a bad game. Yeah. And to throw it 3 times when your quarterback's playing poorly, to me, if he's rolling, and that's the pushback I think that Zach Taylor's going to get, it's like your guy is humming. So your decisions have to be dictated off what's going on in the game.
Peyton Manning has talked about this with analytics before. He said there are times to go for 2, but if you're squeezing out 2 yards a run and they have a pass rush, it can't just be, well, the numbers say, it's like what's happening in the game. 100%. Josh wasn't playing well in the game on the road.
I can't believe they didn't just run the ball 3 times. I mean, they basically burned off like 12 seconds. And even for the Houston Texans, like it was still pretty tight. They only got a 59-yard field goal off. It's not like, well, they ended up kicking a 20-yard chip shot. So that loss, given that CJ threw the pick and had the fumble down the stretch, after you had, again, back-to-back weeks, started really slow, looked terrible. I mean, it looked at one point in time, if Houston was going to play well, like, are they going to lose 40-10 in this game?
Okay, so they tried a trick play. Was it last week?
It was against the Ravens, yeah. It was the Ravens.
All right. And McDermott clearly didn't call it. He said, I'm going to have to talk to our guys about that, Joe Brady. So my question is this Brady or McDermott? I would guess it's Brady.
Well, to me, though, Colin, he's the head coach. So at any moment, he can tell him, he's not calling the plays. And I would guess, like a lot of defensive coaches, he doesn't know the details of every single play in the offensive playbook. But he easily can get on the headset and go, Joe, run the ball here. Yeah. And unless Joe wants to be a malcontent and get fired the next day, he said, yes, coach. That's usually how it works. And I think that is a mistake that clearly he didn't say it. And he let his offensive coordinator, who I think's done a pretty good job since he's taken over, not really debatable. Yeah. That is one that's an embarrassing moment. When your quarterback's playing like he was playing and your offense was playing like it was playing, they were running the ball well. Maybe, who knows? Maybe you bust like a 15, 20-yard run, and then maybe you take a shot. But you got to take a deep breath. You got to force them to take timeouts. And again, they kicked a 59-yard field goal. So the time would not have been on their side. You would have been in overtime. Now, there's no guarantee you go to overtime. Shit, anything could happen. But that is it's hard for me to take the Bills. I was high on them after 3 weeks, but these last 2 weeks, especially today, it's like, well, I don't know, man. I don't know.
It's the drip, drip, drip. There's
and the Texans had a bunch of injuries today too. It's not like they were fully strength.
No, it's just one of those things where when you see things that build up over time, it's the bad call against the Ravens, though I don't think their defense was stopping him anyway. But when you do these standalone games, you're going to be judged more harshly. So that today it was not a standalone game. So you have to be egregiously, outrageously wrong for us to talk about it and people to talk about it. But I can't remember the last time I watched a head coach in the NFL not just make it wasn't a mistake. It was a belief. It was no, we're going to do it on first, on second, on third. It's like, Sean, what are we doing here? What are we doing here?
I think the thing, if you're a Bills fan, which it would be hard to sleep, is like our organization is so well run. We do a really, really good job of like character guys, talented guys. We got rid of Diggs. We looks like we drafted well. Keon Coleman had a big touch. Like we know what we're doing. Like but what has been their downfall over the last couple of years? Specific coaching things. Specific coaching things. Like that's really been the difference of them. Who knows? Super Bowl is a coin flip game usually, but like being in a Super Bowl and getting run in the second round up whatever with 13 seconds left. Like that's kind of been there. You watch today. It's not like we just didn't have enough talent or we're not, we don't have enough good players. Like, no, it's like specific coaching things now has been the Bills' downfall. And in this sport, this isn't baseball where you can blame the GMs because they're setting the lineup. This isn't basketball where the star player can do whatever he wants. Like in football, the head coach, there's a reason they get so much money and so much praise because they do control so much.
Yeah. And adding to that, the Bills' inability to win trophies, even though they've been to several Super Bowls, it just mounts. It just adds an enormous amount of weight on the franchise that you're going to get for as much as Josh Allen takes a beating, you probably have 4 more premier years and then 4 more good years. He won't age like Cam because I think I think mechanically, I think he's more coachable. I mean, he does mechanically get off the reservation, but he gets pulled back in. He's clearly a coachable kid. He's into the right stuff. But you probably only have 4 great years left of just like pure, and then all of a sudden, it's like Travis Kelce says, then you're on your 4th surgery. Your 2nd ankle surgery, your 3rd shoulder surgery. So
but even today, there was a moment late in that game.
Oh, yeah. He got hurt.
He had to go to the tent and Trubisky, and they basically wasted a play on a run.
Yep.
Where I'm sure that they would have passed it with him because they were in the red zone. And he takes a lot of shots. Now, he is physically he's like a LeBron Giannis type of the NFL, right? There aren't many back to Cam, back to Roethlisberger. But look at those guys. And I do think Josh is a pretty special player. Today was pretty bad. They're not going to win with their quarterback going 9-30. They got no chance against the Texans or just a random NFL team.
Now for a segment called Making It Look Easy, brought to you by Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. Today, Lamar Jackson did so. He finished 26 of 42, 4 touchdowns, another 55 yards rushing. That's crazy. Passed for almost 350 yards in a comeback win against the Bengals in Cincinnati. Just like Lamar made it look easy, so does Morgan & Morgan. Makes it easy to submit a claim. Over 100 offices nationwide, over 800 lawyers. Listen, they have made $15 billion. They've recovered that. Proven track record. Fighting to get you full and fair compensation. Morgan & Morgan been fighting for the people for over 35 years. If you're ever injured, go to forthepeople.com/Colin or dial #529. Check out America's largest injury law firm. Winning in the NFL is hard, but hiring Morgan & Morgan is easy. All right, let's talk Chicago Bears 36, Carolina Panthers 10. It's an early window game. So Caleb Williams, again, every week looks a little more secure. 20 of 29, 300 yards, a couple of TDs. They jumped out to a 27-7 lead. Yeah. Swift had a couple of really nice runs. The run game was okay, but Swift does give you, he gives you a pop. He'll hit on a couple of big runs, and so you have to be honest. DJ Moore, again,
big game. Revenge game.
Revenge game. And my take watching Caleb is, and I said this before the season, I said, I don't know if they'll win more than 7 games, which is what Justin Fields won, because I do believe Minnesota, Detroit, and Green Bay, the division's better. Young teams, all good. But I said, you'll feel better about the 7 wins. And I think today, because Carolina was playing pretty damn good football, 2 things today. Once again, we have to give Matt Eberflus some credit. He knows what he's doing on his side of the ball. Secondly, this team was playing well, Carolina, and I think I was thinking about this. When you have somebody that's limited, Bo Nix has some limitations. It makes it easier on Sean Payton. When you have Caleb and you have fewer limitations, it may take you several weeks to figure out, okay, what am I comfortable with? What am I not comfortable with? Now, Cliff Kingsbury, who's Washington's OC, has had several players like Jaden Daniels. So they got symmetry in camp.
Yeah.
But you're looking at Waldron, you're looking at his career, he never had anything like Caleb. So it feels like it's just taken the Bears coordinator and staff, okay, we're not going to do this. We're going to do this. But I thought Caleb I looked around today and I'm like, okay. I mean, one time he was running around. It was almost comical. It looked like a high school thing and he didn't get anything out of it. But if I was a Bears fan today and they only win 7, I feel like I have a franchise quarterback.
Yeah, to me, you see moments like today, if they can get him more consistent throwing the ball down the field, they're going to be a lot more competitive because when you have a really good defense, you're going to be in games. I
Yeah.
just pulled up their schedule because I was thinking, like, they haven't played any 3 teams in their division. They play them all late in the season.
Yeah.
The Vikings, the Packers,
They don't play the
and
Packers till week 11.
yeah, and so you could argue, and the Lions. You could say, well, it's going to be a really tough stretch, but they also could benefit because think how much experience he gets to have, kind of
Yeah.
under his belt, up to like Thanksgiving or whenever they start playing. They also play the Niners in there. Like, if their offense can hit and he can be explosive down the field and they can run the ball, like they could be a competitive, frisky team that competes in the wild card. Like they had no
Absolutely.
chance early on with him overthrowing and not having much confidence in their passing game. But if they can run the ball and he can add the explosive play element, because their defense is, when the dust settles, if they stay healthy, they're going to be a top 5-ish defense in the NFL. And when you have a great defense, you see this with the Broncos, you see this obviously with the Bears. Like your quarterback doesn't have to have a great game. Like they could carry you, and all of a sudden it's 10-10 in the fourth quarter. And you just have to make a play or two. That's always the Niners got away with a lot of that over the years, especially with Jimmy Garoppolo. Well, they were just being a 13-10 game. Then one big run, you win 20-10. When your defense, like today with the Bengals and the Ravens, both those teams, I would imagine on Monday, we should never go to overtime when we score 38 points. We
Yeah.
should win the game by 17 points when the clock hits 00.
That was a
If that's the
wildly
case.
entertaining game, but there's
That
no
was
defense.
that was insane. But the Bears don't play like that. They can rush the passer. They're stout up front, and their DBs are really good. I was texting with a coach who played them early in the season, an assistant coach. He's like, their defensive backs are good. So if you have
Chicago.
good defensive backs in 2024, that's
Yeah.
the Broncos. They have really good defensive backs. Well, half the teams are obsessed with passing. I'm watching the Packers. What do they want to do? Throw the ball. Obviously, the Vikings want to throw the ball. We know the Lions like throwing the ball. So if you can, defend the pass with DBs and you have a good pass rush, you're going to be a serious, serious problem. And to me, Caleb, Purdy's kind of was doing this today, that hero ball.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just a couple steps, get rid of the ball. And if nothing's there, just throw it out of bounds.
Yeah.
Not everything has to be. Lamar can get away with it, but some of these guys that start doing the 360s, I mean, that used to be a Russell Wilson thing. And I think players, on the offensive line would have been like, just get rid of the ball.
Right.
What are we doing? Because every sweet play you hit, 3 or 4 of them screw up and you get sacked, or you maybe throw a pick. So I think the Panthers kind of came back to earth today.
Yeah.
But part of that was the Bears defense. So nice little win.
No, what I really think is I think that they probably need another edge rusher in Chicago, and they got to do a better. They have to get another running back beyond DeAndre Swift and shore up the O-line a little bit. But 36-10 in this league, we have not had a ton of blowouts. Today was interesting because now you're starting to see some blowouts. Now you're starting to see some interesting stuff where teams are separating. But I thought Chicago, this is 5 straight weeks. I thought his first game, he looked a little nervous. I thought the second game, he looked frenetic. I thought the third game, he looked more under control. I thought last week, okay, there it is. And I thought today, I was like, if that's what he was just today, with the parts he has, Keenan Allen comes back. I'm like, oh, they'll win 8 games. They'll spoil somebody's season in December. No question.
Well, I think all of these divisional matchups between the 4 teams in the NFC North are fantastic. If I tell you any mixture of those teams playing each other is on at 125, that team's getting its own television, right? Bears, Packers, Packers, Lions, Minnesota. I mean, that division's really, really good. Obviously, not all 4 of them aren't going to make the playoffs. And if you were a betting man, you'd probably bet against the Bears, of being maybe the odd man out. But who knows? I mean, they kind of control their own destiny. If all of a sudden they go 3-3 in those games, maybe get an upset on the road and win a couple at home, I don't think it's inconceivable they get around that 9 number.
Okay, so I want to talk. Packers beat the Rams 24-19. It was pretty interesting because you kind of felt like the Rams, McVay and Stafford, were kind of just keeping them in the game. I do think the Rams, these are the 2 youngest teams in the NFL. But if you start going up and down and you start looking at numbers, I worry sometimes there is some leakage with the Packers defense, although they are taking it away. And Jordan Love it wasn't a Will Levis moment because I don't think it was nerves. I think he thought, I don't want a safety here.
He was desperate. Yeah.
He was desperate. So it's not, he didn't see that guy. And by the way, that doesn't happen. That kind of play doesn't happen. So take that out. But as I watched that game today, and again, Stafford was 50% on third down. They had a time of possession advantage. They had 370 yards, 236, and they're doing it without Puka, and they're doing it without Cooper Kupp. And I am watching these older guys. And Kirk Cousins old, but he's winning. Aaron's old, and he's not. And I looked at Stafford today, and I'm watching all these guys run around, and Lamar and Brock Purdy and Kyler Murray, and it does limit what the Rams can do. Now, no Cooper Kupp and Puka. But Cooper Kupp now is injured regularly. That's like part of him. And so they need tackles. They need a number one corner. But as I watch that game, I think Green Bay feels like last week in the second half and this week between Reed and Kraft and Jordan Love, they got some really nice offensive pieces. They have some, and not everybody's healthy. But it makes me think about this game today. Would you waste a top draft pick for the Rams to get the quarterback? Or do you just give Stafford one more draft because they have a first, a 2/3, a fourth, 3 sixes? They could get him more weapons. What would you do if you ran the Rams? Would you draft a quarterback? I mean, he's one of the last pocket dudes in this league.
Yeah, to me, he's right at that number, that 36, 37 years old, and he's a weathered individual. Like, he's taken a lot of hits. And, the thing with the Cousins, the pocket, even the Goffs, it doesn't feel like they've taken the punishment, even of Rodgers, because those guys scramble around more and save plays. And that's some of the most legendary plays are outside the pocket, throwing the ball.
Right.
And Stafford feels much closer to Aaron's age than he does Kirk Cousins' age. I would this might just be the year. What they're doing, honestly, even just being competitive these last couple of weeks against the Bears and the Packers was pretty impressive. But there's a 4-point swing, right? If he takes a safety instead of the pick six, that's 24-15 at the end of the game. It's actually not as close as it feels.
Yes.
So it's kind of a freakish play there. I would, again, I don't really love these quarterbacks. So it's like I'm watching Carson Beck. Yeah, I don't really see it. Quinn Ewers, I can't even watch. He's injured. Now, we'll see if he comes back this week against Oklahoma. That's back-to-back years of being an injured guy, and this is in college. He hasn't been in the SEC that long, and hell, I don't even think he's played an SEC game yet because he got hurt before it even started. So he got hurt in the Big 12.
I don't think Shedeur Sanders in LA with McVay, I think they could drive each other crazy. So I'm with you.
I can see McVay kind of liking that, though, because he is – we'll find out over this next 5 weeks about Colorado. But so far, you got to tip your hat to Dion. I mean, they beat the crap out of UCF last week as a 14-point underdog. He's looked pretty good. There's no disputing his – no, he's not super tall, but he's 6'2", 6'2 and a half.
Yeah, he's fine.
Big arm, can move. Really pretty accurate. Now, he holds on the ball a little bit long, but, I mean, he's college quarterback.
No, I think Shedeur, like when I watch Carson Beck, he looks thin. I think he reminds me of Arch Manning as a freshman. I'm like, dude, eat. You need 15 pounds of muscle. Arch has put it on. You can see Arch. Yeah. He's thicker. Those Texas quarterbacks, they have weight room competitions. They're all big, thick kids. Carson Beck does not drive the ball. Beck doesn't drive the ball. And they have an average O-line at Georgia this year, and he's limited. He doesn't have Brock Bowers, and you can see it. He doesn't have a safety valve. So I think Shedeur's the greatest talent. Cam Ward's right behind him. He's fascinating. But let's be honest, the Rams, they don't have the draft capital to move up, and teams aren't moving back. You have to have a core. What do you have to give up to move to like the number 1 or 2 pick?
Yeah, I mean, would you entertain, if you were drafting high enough, just trading Stafford? Or just trade him to the Raiders or something? If you had the opportunity to get a young quarterback, I think that's what you'd have to entertain doing. Obviously, in a perfect world, they would just be fully healthy and roll with Stafford. But we have a couple years now. It's like they had injuries last year. They're adding up again. I mean, it's just... Also, John, he had really ugly moments today. He had a terrible pick last weekend. Oh, he had a terrible... You get at least one a weekend. It's funny. We look at Sam Darnold. See, if I was defending him, and I bet if he was sitting here, it's like, I don't have a choice. I can't... What am I supposed to do? I mean, I have to force the issue to give us, a snowball's chance to move the ball down the field. If I don't let it rip and push, now I think people that are anti-Stafford will say, well, he does that no matter what.
Right.
Right. So I think he's kind of in a tough spot. To me, it's more about the age. And I think historically, you go back to Walsh, you go with Belichick's mindset to Brady of when he shorted him. Now it blew up in his face. I think you can't go wrong shorting older, weathered guys that have been hit a lot. And how often, even when he's playing his best at the end of games, he kind of limping off the side of the field. I mean, that's like a go-to move for his career just because of the punishment he's taken.
Yeah. So Jordan Love, and again, I think he's really talented. And again, that pick six, he just didn't want to. If he would have been at the 12-yard line or something, it would just be a mistake. It's the end zone. It's great. It's one of those classic highlights. It's very Favre.
I think his brain just turned off. He just kind of.
Yeah. So, but I thought today they didn't ask him to do much. And I thought, and I think this is why Matt LaFleur, 15 of 26, 224 yards. He ran 3 times. I think because of the injury and Willis playing, I thought last week's first half he was overwhelmed. Second half he was better. And I thought in this game, Green Bay came in and felt, listen, we're going to win this game. Yeah. We're just going to slow play it. I'm not worried that he's not off to a great start. Are you at all?
To me, he feels somewhere in the middle of not as terrible as he was when he started last season, but obviously he's not the guy that we saw at the end of the season that got the $170 million contract. He's kind of in no man's land right now. Still can make remarkable plays. That I guess it wasn't a touchdown, but like the 80-yard bomb in the air, it's as good as it gets.
Right.
But also when it's in the air, because it's that player, you think, did he just throw a pick into triple coverage? And he can get really loosey-goosey with the ball just kind of flying all over the map. So it's like when I watch him, by the end of the year, because he had stacked so many good games, you had a lot of trust in him as a player. And by the time the playoffs came, you're just like, this is one of the best players in the league. When I watch him right now, I don't trust him. Like when he drops back, I think anything could happen. And whether that's obviously he got injured, but remember, even before he got injured in that Eagle game, I don't know if it's rust. I don't know if it's trying to prove the money, because the way he was playing last year, there was a freeness to it, but there's also a control. He wasn't turning the ball over. He puts a lot of balls into harm's way, Colin. That's my thing. But he can make up for it because with that power arm, and obviously they got some pieces. They're a team that if their defense just plays solid, Jacobs was running really well today. Obviously, the wide receivers, Tucker with the sweet long touchdown, they could be a problem, but they need him because the NFC, let's face it, is pretty wide open right now.
Jason McIntyre,
5 teams could probably win it.
We were talking Friday. He goes, I can't believe you took Arizona. And I'm like, they got humiliated. San Francisco Warner may not play. So, my take is who is good? Well, let's pivot to that. So the New York Giants controlled the Seahawks all day, even when it was 10-10. And they go on to beat Seattle 29-20, blocking a kick up in the Pacific Northwest. So this is the one game I've lost so far. But as we do this, I thought Seattle, no Malik Neighbors, Singletary was banged up. But I will tell you, when you watch the Giants, their O-lines and D-lines, they've committed to those in the draft and in acquisitions. Daniel Jones, 23 of 34, 2 touchdowns, 257. He rushed 11 times or carried 11 times. I thought that is as good as and that's without Malik Neighbors, John. I watched that today, and I'm not surprised by much. Vandy beating Bama, USC losing. Yeah, USC losing the way they did. The Giants, that was 29-20. It felt like they were the better team, and you got to give this team credit. They have an offensive coach, unlike the Jets. Their defensive line's excellent. When I watch the Giants, I think they're well coached. I think they're limited. But Daniel Jones, he moves. He's big. He's healthy now. What did you make of that win? It's something.
Yeah, well, let's just acknowledge this. You removed week 1 when they played Minnesota and got embarrassed. Daniel Jones has been pretty good this season. He really has. He's made a lot of plays. He made a bunch of plays against Washington in the game when they didn't have a kicker. Yeah. And Malik Neighbors, that kind of got his start going. I didn't think he was that bad against the Cowboys. He underthrows some deep balls, but no one ever, he's not Josh Allen or Mahomes. He's not a deep ball thrower, but he's not turning the ball over. There was one time I looked up and he would lower his shoulder. So I think he's playing just pretty solid. Now, are they good enough Like, what does that mean? I don't know. I mean, Seattle, played Monday night in Detroit. What's that flight? 4.5 hours. You lose, you get back. Kind of your classic come out the gates, not playing that hard. New York off a long week because they had just played Thursday, looked like the fresher team. But New
Yes.
York is not, I don't know. They're more likely in my mind to win 6 or 7 than 9 or 10, but they
Right.
are a tough, operation to play right now. They
No,
are
no.
not some
Listen,
joke franchise. This is not, I don't know, think of the worst team in the Miami Patriot game.
they remind me of Denver. They're squeezing every ounce out of their team. And that to me is coaching. I mean, I watched them today and I'm like, Neighbors, Singletary? How the hell do they move the ball? Now, again, Seattle is dinged up on the D line. But when I'm watching Daniel Jones, it's one of those things. It's just the Hostetler, it's Phil Simms, it's Eli. Even when they have the right quarterback in New York, it's never dynamic and pretty. And I love
No.
Phil Simms and Eli, but there's a Hostetler quality to Daniel Jones. And years ago, when I worked at the other place, I used to call them the accounting firm of the NFL. Even when they have a great earnings report, it's boring. They're a boring team. But I don't think you can deny. We have to be totally honest about this. Brian Daboll, and in New York, it's just harder to coach. I mean, if he was going through what Doug Peterson's going through the last 2 months, he'd be done. He'd be out with a Trevor Lawrence. He'd be fired. When I watch that offense, again, I'm watching Sean Payton score 34 today with Bo Nix. They're just squeezing every ounce. Then I watch Josh Allen have a terrible day. So I look at the Giants and I'm like, they have what kind of the Jets don't, which is a really good offensive coach. They get the most out of their talent. There's really no drama. The HBO series didn't help, but there's not a lot of drama around them. They're boring. I don't love Daniel Jones, but I will say this. He'd have a market because of what Brian Daboll's done. He'd have a market.
He's changed, I would say, the narrative, which was not good at all coming into this season. And I think if you just throw on his tape, I mean, he's playing pretty solid. Like he's an NFL starter. The version that we've seen after week 1, which I got news for you. Everyone that plays Minnesota looks pretty crappy, right?
Yeah.
So you could argue that actually aged pretty well on his side. But I just, the NFC East, I was looking at Washington's schedule. Obviously, they get a resounding win today. They get the Ravens coming up, which is going to be difficult. Then they play the Panthers, the Bears, at the Giants. So that division could get weird because they could just have a record, be like 6-3. Then all of a sudden, if you just split a Cowboys or the Eagles and one of those teams, like they're already kind of fighting their way, behind Washington right now, just because boom, they just start 3-1, 4-1. All of a sudden you look up, they're 5-2 and the numbers are just kind of on your side. And then when I play you, if I already got a 2-game lead, you have no margin for error if I'm the Cowboys or the Eagles. And let's face it, like the Giants are not just some lock L to both those two teams.
That's
right.
right.
Hell, they almost beat the Cowboys the other night. There's no telling if they just play the Eagles on a random, Sunday or Monday night that they won't lose that game, that being Philly. Like they are not just some pushover joke 4-win team. Now, I don't think they're a playoff team by any means, but could they win 7-8? I mean, he did it a couple years ago. To me, it's this, can Washington maintain this when they start playing better teams? And New York, like that's an impressive win to go on the road to Seattle. And like you said, the score was close. If you were watching the game, it did not.
It wasn't.
Close. Seattle did not look good. That's by far, when you say Seattle, they looked off today.
Well, here's the good news with Seattle. They really have all the pieces. All they need is a quarterback. I mean, they've got multiple receivers, 2 backs, capable tight ends, a left tackle. They've got their coach. Their D-line's always hurt. Secondary's nice. Linebackers that move. That's a team that could give up 4 picks, move, because they're too talented. They're not going to get a top 12 pick. But that's a team. I thought they should have done it last year. I argued last year was the year to go up and get Penix.
Well, there are 6 of them.
Yeah. So, like, to me, that was my argument. Go get a quarterback. But they had signed Geno, like a Kirk Cousins deal. It's not prohibitive. It's not punitive. And let Geno for a year play. Let the kid sit behind him. But I think it's time for Seattle to make a big pitch. I think when you watch Geno today, he took a couple of bad sacks. He's pretty darn mobile. But I don't think anybody in Seattle. I thought when Pete Carroll said, "Yeah, I can win with Geno and Drew Lock," it's like that's a defensive coach, and I think when defensive coaches tend to lack a little urgency at quarterback. That's why I was so surprised that Tomlin moved off Kenny Pickett so fast. It was like, McVay had 4 starts and moved off him. Thursday Night Football is on. It's only on Prime Video. Best season yet, packed with big rivalries and even bigger stars. Al Michaels, Kirk Herbstreit, Kaylee Hartung every week. Games you can't miss. Coverage begins at 7 Eastern with football's best party. TNF tonight, Thursday Night Football tonight. If you're not a Prime member, no problem. Sign up. 30-day free trial. Cancel anytime. Thursday Night Football, and it's on Prime Video. Restrictions apply. See Amazon.com/Amazon Prime for details. TD, Tutty, taking it to the house. In for 6, whatever you call a touchdown. One thing's for sure. TDs matter more at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. On the ground, in the air, special teams or defense, they don't care how you score them. They want to bet on touchdowns. You want to bet on touchdowns. DraftKings Sportsbook, #1 place to bet on TDs. Ready to place your first NFL bet? Betting something simple, like a player scoring a touchdown. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app. Make your bet today. Ready to do a touchdown dance of your own? New DraftKings customers bet $5 and get $250 in bonus bets instantly and 1 month of NFL Plus Premium. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. The code's Colin. Again, the code, new customers, bet $5 and get $250 in bonus bets and 1 month of NFL Plus Premium only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. So, okay, let's, there's a couple different things to talk about here. Listen, we could talk about Ravens, Bengals. I talk about so much Ravens football that I'll do that more on TV tomorrow. I do want to discuss this because Denver hammered the Raiders 34-18. They now have a better record than the Jets at 3-2 with a rookie quarterback and a roster. This was one of my takes this offseason. The best over bet was Denver because I think their roster's okay, not great. But they are generating a pass rush without a Pro Bowl guy up front. And I watched Bo Nix had a touchdown pass drop today. And this is the difference between defense and offense.
It was a great throw, too. I mean,
great throw.
Stride.
Is I watch Bo Nix. Now, Jaden Daniels is different. I feel like I'm watching Lamar Jackson light. Yeah. That's what I feel like Jaden Daniels. I don't know what Bo Nix's comp is. And I was going to ask you about this as a former scout. I do think there's a ceiling. He is smaller. He doesn't have a big deep arm. It's a little Derek Carr. I think Derek Carr right now has a better deep arm than Bo Nix does. Do you have a comp for it? Because clearly, I mean, Sean is doing a Brian Daboll. He's squeezing every ounce out of this roster. What is Bo Nix's ceiling? Who is he to you?
I think before quarterback inflation, he fell under that Derek Carr, Jimmy Garoppolo. Historically, he would have been a 2nd-round pick.
Okay.
Now, he's a better athlete, and I'm talking the Jimmy when he was decent for the 49ers. And Derek, people love to bag on him. He's had some pretty good years.
Yes.
For a team that, let's face it, no one wins with in the Raiders. So, and I actually kind of, the Saints, I think they're going to have a good season, and he's been playing well this season. So I think he's under that mold. Now, he's a better athlete than both those two guys.
Yes.
Derek, when Derek was young, he had some pretty good pop in his arm. I would say he's got more arm strength than Bo, but he never had a coach of Sean's, level.
He's had a lot of defensive coaches.
Yeah. So I think he can be a really good player if you build up the team. And one thing Sean Payton has done really the last couple of years of Drew Brees, when he brought in Dennis Allen, they became good on defense. I'm watching him today. We know Surtain. I mean, he's been a highly recruited guy since he was like 15 years old. But they have other DBs flying all over the field.
Yes.
It's like, I didn't have the volume on. A couple guys made plays. I had to look up their names. Like, who are these DBs? Because they are, I get it, they're playing the Raiders and Minshew and O'Connell. But that was, okay, you remove that Brock Bowers play early in the game. Once they got to the second quarter, they took control and they came out of halftime, and that was, they curb stomped them. I mean, they absolutely throttled them in the second half.
And they're offensively, Mims looks like a good pick. Javonte Williams, a running back. He can catch it and he can run it. I think I've always liked Cortland Sutton.
They like the Oregon wide receiver that dropped the ball, Franklin.
And
it's kind of the knock on him right as the hands, but he's got speed, and they played together in college.
So I kind of look at Denver and
are they a playoff team?
John, I look at them like I look at Chicago. You watch their defense and you're like, okay, so I have a Super Bowl trophy coach. Their defense is much better than people think. It's faster than people think, like Chicago, and they have a rookie quarterback. The difference is the NFC North may be the best division in football, probably is, whereas the Raiders are a mess. The Chargers, you cross their fingers, they get healthy.
Injuries,
the Chiefs are vulnerable, though they're on a heater. They're vulnerable. I mean, in fact, I like the points in the Saints tomorrow. They're just not beating anybody. Denver is, I mean, it's 34-18, and they dropped a touchdown. I think their personnel, I like this GM, Patton. I didn't love the Russell Wilson move, but in fairness, I liked it when they made it. I didn't know Russell was going to drop off the cliff. I kind of like Denver's players.
Well, to me, when you look at the landscape of the AFC, right, the Chiefs, the Texans, are going to be there. Obviously, the Bills are going to be there. Right now, the Chargers are the 7 seed, and just based on injuries, you just know they're going to have so many. It's going to be hard to overcome. If their quarterback's banged up, they'd just be screwed. But turns out Miami sucks. The Jets are, a complete wild card at any moment. I mean, there's been multiple times this season when Rodgers went down, and you're like, is he going to get back up? I mean, that happened today when he got bent over. You thought, is his season over? And even if his season, he plays in all 17 games, that they are by no means no lock to win 9 games. The Browns, a playoff team from last year, is an absolute train wreck right now. I mean, has the worst quarterback situation / vibes going on right now because of the negativity surrounding that situation. So I think you just look at the landscape of the AFC. Cincinnati, who obviously is pretty good. I mean, they got a pretty special offense, but you start playing a numbers game, all of a sudden you're 2-5. How do you ever get back? You're not able to win enough games in a row when you have that big of a flaw as a defensive football team. That's what's crazy about the Ravens is like, where did their defense go? But Cincinnati, they're not good on defense. And it's hard. I don't care if you got Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins, who all look fantastic. If your defense is that bad, well, the Broncos are like, hey, we're going to have some games when the kid throws for 75 yards. And you know what? We'll win the fucking thing 16-13. We got no problem doing it. Like, Cincinnati doesn't even have that capability. Harbaugh, in theory, would, but Joey Bosa's already sitting in a suite. The injuries have kind of unraveled. And, you got Herbert limping around. It's hard. This team just the speed of Denver's defense. I got to do more of a deep dive on their defensive roster. I don't even know some of their players besides Surtain, who is, what does he look like right now? Like Charles Woodson meets Rod Woodson in his prime? How good does he look?
No, it is. And I last year, the Rams were they're better than you think team. Denver this year was their roster is, they have a quarterback I like, a Super Bowl coach, a more than capable left tackle. I like their wide receivers, and I think Javonte Williams is a player. Their linebacking core moves well. I say what you want. They move well. College Football Reactions presented by JLab. JLab has the best audio products in the game. They're ready to take care of you this football season. Traveling to watch your favorite team or just streaming the game at home. Find the Blue Box at Walmart, Target, Best Buy, or go to jlab.com. Love their stuff. The Blue Box. So, all right. So I want to give this some time. USC. We usually do one big college football topic, and since I'm viewed as a USC homer, I might as well just embrace it. So
you're lucky Vanderbilt, Alabama happened. It kind of overshadowed it a little.
Vanderbilt, by the way, is clever. A lot of misdirection. Listen, you come off the Georgia game, and even though it's you can say, well, Nick gave you a Mercedes. Listen, Nick lost to Louisiana Monroe with good players. Alabama didn't have to rebuild a roster. They had players. They had no coaches. So it happens. Vanderbilt fooled them. They weren't ready for it, and it got ugly fast, and now you're trailing, playing from behind. You have to call the game differently. It happens. But I was looking at USC, and I was texting somebody this morning who covers them, and I said, the one thing that jumped out to me, Minnesota played like it was a Rose Bowl. Minnesota, the stadium was full. PJ Fleck, say what you want, brings a ton of intensity. Those guys were jumping all over the place. Their running back was powerful. USC's bad tackling has reemerged, which we thought it was done after the LSU game. It reemerged against Michigan. I saw it again this weekend. And now their offense is young. But when I watched the game plan, John, not a lot of motion, not a lot of different sets. from Lincoln Riley. Miller Moss has been in that program now 3 years. Okay. This is not a transfer. He knows the offense. They've got some really, their offensive line is young, and at right tackle is a problem. But I got to tell you, I have defended Lincoln to the end. And I defend most coaches. And I think we all know that Lincoln's good offensively. But that loss is not just a loss, John. It feels like one step forward, two back. I don't know if you overcome that. I mean, you're essentially now with their schedule, they're not making the playoff. And
No.
LA
and they're not a playoff team, right? I mean, they got that first half last week, I would say, against Wisconsin was a little alarming, was it not?
They were a mistake-prone mess.
So to me, their wins, the Michigan win, which I thought was impressive because you're just watching it live, the physicality, that game has not aged well. Turns out Michigan doesn't know how to execute the forward pass and just lost by 10 against Washington, who I'm not sure is that good. Right. So, and even LSU, which at the time felt like an impressive win because of the brand and because of the name recognition of their players, how many guys are going to get drafted, LSU might turn out to be an 8-win team. So it's like, it's just Ohio State, and we'll see with Oregon. Obviously, they play each other this week, but in terms of the talent on their roster, in kind of a different level right now. And defensively, like they were going to hang their hat on that, which looked like they could. It just turns out Michigan's offense is putrid. Right. And Wisconsin obviously is not very good on offense either.
Listen, USC, this is the one college roster I know pretty much front and back. USC has 2 playable tackles on their team, and one's not good. So they have a redshirt freshman, Elijah Page, left tackle. He's not good, but he is their future. His backup is a redshirt freshman who is 6'2". He's a center. They have no backup left tackle. You think it's bad now. Mason Murphy, the right tackle, they have a kid behind him, Tobias Raymond. He's not ready to play. They've leaned into Mason Murphy for years. It's just too slow a foot. It's too many mistakes. He's a college kid, whatever. But you cannot be USC. I mean, you go to Oregon or Ohio State right now, and there's 6 tackles that are 6'6" and above.
Yeah.
There are 6 to 7, 4 to 5 star tackles. One's a senior, a couple are juniors. USC has 2 playable offensive tackles, a center backup left tackle, a kid that's not ready to play at right tackle. In the NIL era with USC's brand, that's on Lincoln. That's the offense. Well, dude, that's not good enough.
I've always thought, Sark, who now obviously has Texas rolling, and Ryan Day had this issue too. Once Urban left, they became so offensive centric and loved passing that Ohio State, most of my life, has been a defensive first NFL guys at every single position. And then they kind of fell off a cliff because they were just passing and all their wide receivers and quarterbacks were so awesome. Well, then they used NIL to, listen, maybe they're never going to practice like Jim Harbaugh in terms of running power for 70 minutes of a 2-hour practice, but you can just buy those guys. So what did Ohio State do this offseason? They bought the kid from Bama. Like they started buying defensive players. Sark, clearly, like, listen, he's an offensive pass game guy. Like that's who he is at his core, which is fine. He's really good at it. But your defense in practice, like that was always a downfall of Mike Leach. Now he could never recruit at the schools to their level, but you don't create a physicality in practice when you're just passing the ball all over the place. Jim Harbaugh's teams are not physical by accident. That's because the way they practice is a physical practice, 6 months a year. So what does Texas do? They have unlimited money like Ohio State. They start opening the checkbook. Oregon, now they've had defensive coaches, and Mario's an offensive guy, but he's an O-line guy, and he thinks like that. They just start paying people. And it's like if USC is going to be on those guys' levels, Texas, Ohio State, because they are going to be consistent powerhouses because they are opening enormous checks right now and paying a lot of money for players. And obviously Lincoln, he is going to be able to figure out the offense over time. Like that is his baby. He knows that. But defensively, they're going to have to be cutting huge checks for defensive players because that's kind of the name of the game now.
I mean, one of their linebackers is 6'6", Eric Gentry. He didn't play, or if he did, not much. And their tackling was just exposed. But their linebackers aren't big. They're not intimidating. I mean, they have one guy, Anthony Lucas, that will get drafted defensively. I'm talking first 2-3 rounds, probably gets drafted. They just don't have enough great players. They have a kid named Jacoby Lane's his name. He's a wide receiver. He's like 6'5" out of Arizona. He's a very, very tough to defend. Deuce Robinson, very tough to defend. They're like 6'5" wide receivers. They're very good players. They're not great. They're not like the Ohio State kid or the Alabama receiver. But and their NIL, they have $13 million. They're not, this is not a poverty program. They've got real money here. Washington's got 7.5. They've got 13 in the NIL. So when I look at their situation, they don't have an elite defensive tackle or an elite. They have one good center on offensive line. If you counted all their DO linemen and you had 20 guys, you have Anthony Lucas on the defensive side, Monheim on the offensive line. They got 2 guys that are draftable.
But here, if you think about it, last year Pac-12, when you say had one of its best seasons, like of the last 20 years, and they won 7 games, right? They went 7-5. And then you go into the Big Ten, which, like the Pac-12 last year, just has, like, on a given game, if you're on the road at Minnesota, at Iowa, like, you can lose, right? Like last year with Lincoln, like you went on the road to Arizona, or I guess Arizona came to USC, but you know what I mean? Like the program was deep, and on any given week, in theory, you should never lose to a Vanderbilt, whoever's the bottom feeder, but the teams in the middle, and we can argue till we're blue in the face, what conference is deeper, the SEC or the Big Ten? I do know if any of those middle tier 6 to 8 win programs play well at home on a given week, they can beat most teams, especially now with the NIL and transfer portal era. It's all kind of watered down. The day and age of like the 2001 Miami, hell, just like 3 years ago, Kirby Smart team with 25 NFL guys starting on his, 2 deep. Like those days are done. You look at Georgia now, they look like a shell of themselves. Those early Saban Bama teams, he kind of loaded up the roster. It doesn't exist anymore. So it's much more watered down, which if you don't get it right in the NIL, if you're not paying, like the top guys are going to garner a lot of money, your talent's not going to be that much different, because Minnesota can get a couple transfers here and there. And all of a sudden it's like, this team's not that good. Well, actually they got this guy from there and this other guy from there. And all of a sudden you're down 10 in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I thought that was the Tulane loss, but that was an 11-win season. But the way they lost, that was ugly. And this one it's just not acceptable. Again, there was a little wind. That can't keep your offense down to 17 points against Minnesota. Bad
I'll
loss.
tell you this. I didn't sleep much because I stayed up late watching that Cal-Miami game.
Oh, Jesus.
And that place, I grew up with my dad going to Memorial Stadium, and, the difference of Cal and Stanford, Cal does have a pretty good fan base. And when they're good, that place will fill out. And it was rocking, and they were kicking Miami's ass. And you go, this is Mario. He's not coming back to back, winning this thing. And they pulled off one of the craziest comebacks you'll ever see. I mean, what an incredible win. And they're a good example. Like, they got some money. They're buying some players.
Well, also, unlike
they're not
USC,
the most well-coached, but they're talent deep.
Also, Mario's teams were physical. You didn't love them situationally, but he was a big, strong guy. He's a UFC fan. Like, Oregon was physical with Mario. Miami's physical and tough. And Cam Ward's special. And Miami's got the kind of NIL money. They'll just go buy Cam Ward. I was texting Ryan Russillo today. I said, I watched Cam Ward do that for 2-3 years in Pullman. Nobody watched him. So it's like when he went to Miami, I'm like, you guys don't have any idea what you're getting. You have no idea how good this Cam Ward is. He just had no pros around him. So they're for real. Listen, it's hard to ask kids to go from Miami to Cal, 3,000 miles. A lot of these kids, when I was 18, had you been to the South? Like, I didn't, these kids don't know.
I was having some beers with a buddy last night. I'm like, do you understand what time these guys are going to get home? Do the math. They'd lose hours flying home. If they get on the plane by 1 o'clock, it's 9 o'clock in the morning when these players are landing. It is pretty crazy, some of these matchups now, because of the conference realignment, which also makes it fun. Like, that was a real fun game. And Miami got very, very lucky. But it also, you're watching them, you see Bama lose. I think Georgia's a shell of themselves, what they've been. So to me, it's like, obviously Texas and Ohio State are really good, but we've seen college football, it's got a little NCAA tournament feel to it. Like, I think there are 7-8 teams once we get to the top 12 that if Boise makes it, are you watching their running back? He looks like, the best player in the guy's having one of the most incredible seasons in like the history of college football. Something you would have seen in like the 80s with like Barry Sanders. The
way USC can't stop a powerful running back, Boise State would give USC fits.
Oh, he'd have for 200 plus yards. They gave Oregon fits. And who knows? What if that's like the 12-5 game? Would you want to play Boise State as the 5-12 game?
No.
So it's like I actually think that the playoffs going to have an NFL feel a little bit with a little NCAA tournament. You're going to have a couple. Is Ohio State down 10 in the going into the fourth quarter? It's football too. It's only one game. It's not a best of 5 series.
That's right. John Middlekauff, as always, crushed it. Thanks, buddy.
A lot of football, Colin. Talk soon.